Thanks. Apparently there's some way to like ask questions through some app, so feel free to start piling those on. I'm sure I'm going to generate a lot of questions as we go. And thanks for showing up for what promises to be a screamingly interesting talk about file formats, right? Like, it's going to be awesome. Yeah, so we're going to look at kind of image formats specifically. I think a lot of these new devices, we're starting to see people reusing old technologies. I think that's great. We're going to see some extensions. We're also going to see some brand new stuff. And just kind of figure out where it's all going. And the reason for this, frankly, is that we're in uncharted territory. There really aren't kind of existing standards that work really well for these new formats. I think the displays are actually outrunning the software stack a bit. And frankly, standards bodies are not all the way there yet. This is a partial workflow diagram showing how I think one image format standard would move from one committee at SMPTE to another. So it's going to be a little bit slow, and I think that probably it's going to take a while before standards bodies are actually dictating where these things are going. What's probably going to happen, and this is just my guess, is that some sort of standard will evolve in the marketplace, and then it will get propagated as a formal standard. So that's why it's important that we all understand it now. Decisions the developers are making are actually going to drive the adoption of standards down the road, rather than the other way around. And frankly, the reason we need to talk about it is because the software stack does need a lot of work. Today's standards aren't really up to the task. So let's start with the basics. Where we are today, and today I think primarily means VR. Obviously, some AR stuff is coming into the market. So to me, the formats of today are 360 video and volumetric approaches, right? So you got polygons and meshes and so on. I think in the near future, we're going to see a few changes. I think video is going to go to more of a depth-based video format. I'll talk about what that means. Volumetric is going to stay volumetric. I think it's a really strong format, and it's going to be a really important part of the mix. And we're also going to see light fields become part of the mix. That's what my company is working on at Visby. So obviously I'm a little biased. Take that with a grain of salt if you want. I think it's a really powerful format for the future. So RGB plus depth. Basically, this is an extension to existing video format standards. The idea is traditional video would somehow convey color data, red, green, blue. If you augment that with depth data, you can start to have a richer image format that works with these new displays. The idea is pretty simple. Instead of just 3 values, you have 4. That 4th value is just the distance from the user, right? You'll see this as an acquisition format oftentimes, as sort of an alternative to like point clouds and so on. And it's sort of an entry point into other approaches. I think it's also going to be a display format. Volumetric, that's a catch-all term for anything that uses polygons and meshes. Obviously, game engines use this extensively. Very natural fit for a lot of these displays, very robust. The act of getting images into a volumetric format, if you're originating from the real world, that's kind of an open question, a lot of different approaches there. Okay? The data format, typically there's a lot of different ways to skin that cat, but typically you're carrying around mesh data, polygons of some sort, and texture data, right? Pixels in some way or another. The last one's light fields, okay? So the idea behind a light field is represent the actual light that's being used to view the scene, not the underlying structure, and do it in this kind of holographic way, right? It's a half-hour talk of its own right for me to delve into what that means, but essentially you're grabbing light data from a very large area, and then the user, as the user moves around, you can pick which light rays they would have seen and construct the image based on that. It's a pretty powerful approach. And we'll delve into what that means and how to use it in the future. Okay, so let's do a little deeper dive on these 3 classes of format. RGB plus depth, the good part about it is it works. There's solutions that are out there right now. It extends a very, very robust software stack, right? You get compression and delivery and decode kind of for free with kind of the 30 years of work that's been done on video compression. And you're seeing some movement towards this from standards bodies like SMPTE and MPEG and so on. So I think we're going to see this pretty early on, and it's going to have pretty good performance at first. The bad part is it's kind of a half measure, right? You get this very, very, very small amount of parallax based on this depth mapping. You don't get sort of real roundness and real 3D effect. That's one of its big weaknesses. Really, really bad thing is that you have discrete depths also, right? Unlike a polygon model, you can't really represent deep and round scenes very well. So this is going to end up having a role, but I think we're going to see it supplanted for a lot of uses by richer formats. Also, you're deferring to the decoder to decide how to fill in the gaps. That could be good, that could be bad. I think it's kind of a problem when you defer to the user, how they're going to actually look at the scene, but that's just my bias. Okay, volumetric. Volumetric approaches are great because it works. It's sitting on a similarly robust stack, and it's very much native to a lot of these devices. I think a lot of the people who are making hardware displays are developing against some sort of polygon model anyway, so it's a pretty natural fit. It allows for very large movement space, unlike RGBD. You can move all around as long as you've got a robust polygon model. You know what it would look like from any angle. And it does allow for interactivity, right? If you've got the 3D data, it's fairly straightforward to manipulate it and change it. The bad news is capture's tough, right? There's a lot of different companies working on capture. Each approach has its own strengths and weaknesses. And compression is really difficult. You're carrying around two radically different types of data, and you got to compress them both. There are people working on polygon compression. Obviously, texture compression is a 30, 40-year-old field, but that's two different types of data that you have to deal with. And I haven't personally seen a great compressed 3D model. Microsoft Research Lab released something last year that did a pretty good job. But it's, again, an open question is how you're going to deliver these files. And then the ugly for volumetric. The trouble with a 3D mesh and a 3D model is it doesn't inherently capture a lot of scenes that are of interest to us, right? If something doesn't have a well-defined shape, like smoke or mist or fog or even water, capturing it and representing it is really challenging. A lot of these things come to bear on the human face, frankly. There's little specularity, little glints and reflections. And when those aren't there, things look uncanny. So to the extent you see imagery for VR and AR of humans' faces that doesn't look quite right, part of it is the fact that it's all built on these 3D meshes, and they don't really convey little things about light that are really important. The reason we notice it for human faces has to do with how we kind of have a lot of our brain circuitry working on face recognition, right? If a table doesn't look quite right, we won't necessarily notice. If there's something a little bit off about someone's eyes, it really bothers us. This is also true of RGBD, obviously. It's masked by the fact that RGBD has so little movement space that you kind of don't get that effect. Okay, light fields. This is a little further from market. The good news is a proper light field is extremely photorealistic with positional tracking. That's critical. There's my sort of spirit animal, the goat. The idea is the light bounces off your scene object, whatever it is. As long as you can accurately represent what that light was, you have necessarily recreated the scene correctly, and it should be photorealistic. There's a lot of asterisks there, right? This is all theoretical, but if you do a good enough job, it should be basically perfect, because you're not limited by some underlying representation. You're just looking at the light itself. That's a really good thing. The bad news is getting that good representation is challenging. On the left, an early light field camera came out of Stanford. You just had to pack together lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of cameras. That's a big deal. Creates a lot of data. And some other sort of strange problems. It turns out that if you've got all those cameras packed together, you're actually not capturing that much of the light. I've got a little inset picture of a fisheye lens, and you'll see the sort of red area around the outside is the iris of the lens. That's blocking light. The only light that actually gets captured by that lens is that tiny green circle in the middle. So even with a densely packed array of cameras, you're actually leaving a lot of light behind that you have to later interpolate. And that interpolation can cause problems. On the upper right, I've got a scene that has a lot of what I refer to as spatial structure. As you move, the scene changes dramatically because the reflections on the water are changing, right? If you imagine the user where the boat is in that case. The net result is if you don't properly capture that signal and reconstruct it, you get aliasing. And the lower right is an example of aliasing in a 2D image, right? What happens with aliasing there is there's the brick pattern. If you undersample that brick pattern and try to recreate it, you end up with this weird structure. In signal processing terms, that's aliasing. You've got high-frequency information there that you didn't properly capture and represent. In light field terms, in VR and AR, aliasing looks bizarre. I don't have any examples for it because it's a dynamic thing, but it's a very, very serious problem. And whether or not light fields are going to take off is going to depend on people's ability to handle aliasing. And the ugly, of course, is that there really aren't light field approaches out there right now. They're near to market. There's people working on it, Lytro, Otoy, and others. But frankly, this is a future technology, including my company, Visby, is working on it. So we'll get there. Now, in the near term, there is a sort of strange synthesis. A lot of people talking about light fields are actually doing a hybrid approach. As I referred to in that aliasing part, one way of handling aliasing problems is actually to turn around and blend a 3D polygon approach with light field data. So the problem with a 3D polygon approach oftentimes is that as you move, the pixel textures don't change, right? And that means you can't really represent specularity well, and it makes a slightly less rich model. If instead you carry around some light field data, so you get that specularity, you can get that dynamic pixel map, but you also carry around a polygon model, which helps with this light field aliasing problem. You kind of get the best of both worlds. The downside, of course, is if you took a data problem and you just kind of made it much, much, much worse, right? But that is one approach that's closer to market. And if you look at Lytros experiences, they're doing something very similar to that. So in the future, I think we're probably going to see a mix. And my claim here is that AR, VR, these new displays, image formats are going to look more like still image formats in that we have a lot of different formats used for different purposes, right? We've got PNG and GIF and vector graphics, right? And depending on the application, you choose one or the other. I think that images in the VR and AR world are going to be similar. Unlike, say, video. Right now, when you get a video, 99% of the time, it's H.264, done, right? So I think we're going to see this kind of mix of formats instead because the various strengths and weaknesses of the approaches matter. For RGBD, I think we're going to see kind of what I refer to as dynamic posters. They have just a little bit of movement, so if you're drawing something in front of someone, they'll be able to move around. It'll look like a little bit more interesting than the static texture, but it will be pretty limited. I think we're going to see it take off pretty quickly because it can probably leverage things like hardware acceleration and the existing technology stack pretty well. And I think it's going to be for less powerful content, user-generated content, and live streaming. Again, leveraging the existing infrastructure means it'll probably be faster to a live streaming type application. Volumetric approaches, I think we're going to see that's the sort of prototypical AR case where you're drawing something in front of someone in the real world, right? That mixed reality thing. Volumetric excels at that. I think you're going to see hybrid experiences and games are going to leverage it very heavily. Again, interactivity is a strength of the volumetric approach. And it should be a pretty large part of the market in the near term. Light fields, I think, are going to be far and away the most photorealistic. You're going to get your cinematic experiences. Anywhere the image quality really matters, that's where light fields are going to excel. I think a proper light field in VR and AR is going to look a bit like windows to other places or crystal balls, where as you move around, you can really feel like you're looking into another space, or if you're totally surrounded by it, like you're immersed in another space or transported somewhere. Okay, so that's the bulk of the format talk. I'm clearly speaking super fast, so I'd love to do a little call and response and questions. I swear that took like 3 times as long, and I ran it myself. Okay, shouldn't depth information have more than 256 values? Sorry, going out of speed here. It certainly can and it should. Now, the reason we have 256 values for a lot of image formats is just that's basically what displays used to be able to do, and honestly, going beyond 8-bit displays for RGB values is still kind of a niche, as it turns out. So the fact that a lot of RGBD that's out there also restricts itself to 8-bit values is a legacy issue. If the format's going to be successful, yeah, we could turn around and say, let's put a floating point value in there and go nuts, right? And then we can have much more continuous spaces. You know, you lose some of the extensibility that way, but that's probably how that's going to evolve. So we can get to sort of more richly textured depth scenes with RGBD. Okay, so are we going from the bottom here? Is that how this works? The top.
Most voted are at the top.
Okay, sorry. So I jumped out of speed there. Okay, you mentioned the large data footprint of light field images. Can you comment on computational performance of light field? Can embedded devices synthesize light field imagery? The short answer is no, not right now. There's still a lot of work to be done on that. Light fields are very compressible. My company, Visby, has a very, very tight focus on compressing light fields and trying to represent them properly. And I can say with confidence that the apparent very large data footprint of a light field, right, if you imagine a high-resolution image from every single point, that's a huge amount of potential data. But those images are hyper-redundant. As you move around across that array of cameras, the scene doesn't actually change that much. So light fields are actually inherently highly, highly compressible. Computational performance, on the other hand, is also an open question, right? And it all depends on your underlying representation. When I was on the light field slide, I didn't show the kind of standard data format for that. There is no standard data format for light fields. And how you choose to draw your representation affects not only its compressibility, but also the computational intensity of the decode. Not to punt on this question or not, but frankly, it's an open question. People are working on it. I don't see consensus yet, and there aren't firm numbers on it. I believe we're going to get to mobile device footprints, both for data rate and decode flop counts, within a couple of years. I can't prove that, but we're working on proving it. What type of compression algorithms are you guys investigating? That's probably a trade secret right now, but I would say we're personally drawing up brand new ones from scratch. We're kind of way out on a limb, beyond published literature. Light fields have kind of been an academic curiosity for a while, but no one's really done much with them commercially, outside of Lytra, obviously. So to really make progress there, you're kind of doing things from scratch. That's probably not a satisfying answer, but it's a really honest one. How intensive is lighting and reflectance with light field rendering with dynamic real-world lighting? I'm not sure I entirely understand that question. Is Mike S. in the audience able to?
Anybody able to add color to that question?
How do you, with a light field image, how do you handle like real-world lighting and reflective materials?
That's a good question. So when some people talk about light fields, particularly OTOI, they're talking actually about this much larger scale idea of the 8 degree of freedom light field reflectance function, right? Basically, it's not just the light that's coming in that you would capture with cameras, but it's actually modeling light that enters the scene and bounces off of objects and comes back out. The reason that's compelling and interesting is if you want to place an object in an AR environment and have it really match the world, you need to be able to have it update based on the lighting that it's experiencing as well. So as you move it, reflections need to change. If you turn on a light over there, its illumination has to change also. That's really complex stuff. And I think it's really theoretical. There are some people who claim it's going to happen, and there's been some like really clever papers that really look into that 8 degree of freedom function. But if you do a deep read on the literature, it all feels fairly contrived, and I don't think that there's really a near-term answer for that. So that's why I say light fields are going to be like windows to other worlds and crystal balls. I don't think they're actually going to handle taking real-world light input and synthesizing it very well for a while. I'd love to be proven wrong. And to the extent it can be proven wrong, it's probably going to be something really clever doing neural nets and something weird, because the straightforward approach to the problem is really hard and doesn't look tractable to me. So let's see, how many orders of computation is needed to add depth to RGB? Does it affect real-time performance? I don't have a good answer for that one right now, just because I think it's somewhat an open question. I don't have direct experience with it. In practice, I think it's pretty quick. Now, the thing about video and RGB values and all that is the reason they're fast is because we've got coprocessors on all our phones, right? The day you're starting to dedicate silicon to something, it just goes like way, way, way faster. So I don't know how soon we can shoehorn depth data into that. Yeah, I'm really not qualified to answer that. But I would say it probably depends on how rich that data is. If we go to something beyond 8-bit values, it's probably going to start to suffer a little bit. But it should be within the realm of mobile devices even. That's far and away the least computationally intensive approach of the three. OK, what type of... did I not satisfactorily answer the compression algorithms question? Is it just going to stay up there until I deal with it? Is the LFR, light field raw format, the standard for light field imagery? There really are 0 standards for light field imagery. I think the LFR, that's the Litro format. Is that correct? Sound right? And that was for their still images. So someone just shout out if I got this completely wrong. What those still images were was an extension on top of JPEG. I think this is public knowledge. I'm not revealing anything I shouldn't. They basically just snapped a JPEG off of the 2D sensor. The 2D sensor had a bunch of lenslets on it, so that 2D image sort of implicitly included 4D data. And so then all of their software sat on top of that and would do fun ray shuffling things. But underneath the hood, it was just a JPEG with some crazy custom header metadata. So it was an interesting file format. It nowhere near approached a standard. I mean, it counts as a standard, I guess, because some people hacked it, right? So therefore, it's a standard. But in practice, it was really only limited to the sort of refocusing images that their early cameras came out with. And I think they've even moved away from it with their current cinema camera. I don't have that on any authority, but I'm just speculating. What are light field display materials? Really, this is my contention. Anything that allows the image to change with the user's perspective as they move around is functionally a light field display, right? So today's VR headsets, if they have positional tracking, they're light field displays. Gear VR is not, right? Because you can look in any direction, but as soon as you move, well, you can't support new perspectives with the hardware. Therefore, it's not a light field display. But the Oculus, the Vive, PSVR, those are light field displays because a large-scale light field is all about generating perspectives as you move around. Any AR headset is necessarily a light field display because as you move around, you can deliver new perspectives, right? There are a third class of display that are, I don't know how near to market they are. There's a bunch of interesting technology being developed and some products that are coming out, but essentially holographic panels, right? Panels where as you move around, you can see new perspectives. I know RealD is working on one. I've heard of a couple other companies behind closed doors are working on it. Some startups have announced stuff. they're going to suffer from image format problems even worse than VR and AR are, I think, because when people have a TV, they expect it to behave like a TV. They expect to be able to take content and just put it up there and let it work. And so, the software stack there is very much holding back the hardware stack. But I think we'll see. I think we'll see. I clearly drank too much coffee. I've been blazing through this. Let's get some more questions here. Is everyone totally satisfied? Totally understand all the file formats of the future? Live broadcasting. Live broadcasting is tough, right? So I think that, okay. That's where I think RGBD is going to be good if people can come up with some sort of real-time depth mapping, right? The Kinect is a good example of that. Here's an integrated device that gives you a data stream in real time that has something vaguely holographic, RGBD, right? So I think to the extent people are going to start looking at live broadcasting into VR and AR, something like that approach would be pretty effective and near to market. Full-on polygon reconstruction right now is still way too computationally intensive to do in real time, even if you're like admitting fairly large latencies. So I don't think that that's going to be anything near term. I guess you could kind of project Moore's law and say, oh, we're going to get real-time volumetric broadcasting in 10 years because 1.8 to the 10th is huge. I don't know though. For light fields, I have some sense that we may get to light field live broadcasting sooner than you would expect based on the state of the tech. I can't talk about it extensively, but we're working on some IP that should allow us to recover light fields from large-scale sensors in near real time. So stay tuned, I guess. That's kind of an annoying teaser.
In the back.
Can you elaborate on color space in the light?
So yeah, I can. It's probably not going to be very helpful. We're personally just working from existing image data sets, right? So if you start with an array camera, you're limited by the capture color space. You can do color space manipulations beyond that. There is some sense when you've got lots and lots and lots and lots of views that you do have some additional data. It doesn't really extend well to extending color spaces. You can do a little super resolution, some other things, but you tend to be limited by the two-dimensional acquisition camera in your light field array. The file format itself can be as expressive as anything you want. Yeah.
So I was just wondering if you could comment. It seems like it's time we need to subdivide the term light field into some of the different capabilities. Because you said light field display would enable parallax, but you also want that change depth of focus, which is another question on there too. So, and then you mentioned the OTOY notion of light field is
Yep.
yet a different concept. So, shouldn't the community start coming up with a new subtaxonomy for light field?
Yeah, okay. I realize I should probably repeat the question because this is going to be streamed. So the question was basically, is the taxonomy already getting confused? Do we need more words for light fields? Because we've got, on the one hand, we've got the OTOY and other people talking about these 8D reflectance fields. We've got light fields for what I'm talking about, perspective generation. And we've got light fields for refocusing. And people want all of them. How can we handle that? So yeah, terminology is a major problem. I mean, if you want to talk about light fields for a second, people are abusing that term in VR right now, and you've got people who are doing something that's categorically volumetric, and all their marketing materials talk about light field. And I find that deeply annoying. I don't think it really matters yet. If anyone has any ideas for what we should call light fields to like distinguish them, tell me privately so it doesn't get co-opted right away, and then in a year we can roll it out. No, terminology is a major problem. The OTOY one, the 8D thing, like I think people have very, very complex terms for it, and that's where it belongs because it's like an academic concept. And the day it gets closer to market, someone will invent something clever for it. The distinction between large-scale light fields for generating novel perspectives and small-scale light fields for focus. By the way, that's the distinction, right? If you have large-scale light ray data, you can pick and pull out the light rays you want to see to generate that perspective. If you have a near-field display or something that is able to convey focus, the way it does it is by really directly addressing different parts of your iris, different parts of your eye, right, and delivering different light ray data to them. So it's essentially a tiny four-dimensional region of light rays, right? That probably sounds a bit abstract, but functionally, what conveys focus to our eyes is the angle the light comes in at. If an object is very close to me, the light coming from a point there is diverging, right? And I experience that when I focus my eyes there. I'm taking those diverging rays and bringing them back together to a point so it's in sharp focus. If it's very far away, those light rays are not nearly as diverging. And so when I'm focused at a distance, I take roughly parallel rays, and those will then converge. So if you can address individual light rays across someone's eye, then you can actually convey focus in a headset. That's the difference between like today's VR headsets where they've just got a 2D screen and all of the pixels are at some given focal plane, versus something like what Magic Leap has promised, what Avigant has demonstrated, not to me personally, but in videos and stuff. They're clearly doing something where they are changing the angle of the rays as they go towards the eye. So the strange thing is, now that I've just gone on that elaborate and long digression, I actually think the two are more similar than they seem. It turns out that we're talking about a difference of scale, and in practice, people are generally addressing one or the other, right? Oh, we're doing light fields, but it's for perspective generation in VR and AR, right? Or, oh, we're doing light fields, but it's for refocusing in a camera, or it's for focal planes in the eye. It turns out that it's really just a question of precision. If you have that large-scale light ray data, but you have it so precise, you can actually infer focus from that. And that should make sense. As you move around in a scene, you're seeing objects parallax, right? If you got the light field correct, as you move around, things should parallax correctly. Well, that parallax is actually the flip side of the focus coin, right? The angle the rays diverge at is a function of how far away they are, the same way that the parallax is. So if you are doing it correctly in theory, you could kind of convey both. And so maybe the distinction is not as clear as it should be. I should say, though, that I have not personally looked into that, right? This is abject crazy theory. So I might be up here in a year talking about how we need two different terms for light fields because they're totally different. But as of right now, it looks like there's actually a continuum. Oh, good, we got some more. Pros and cons of dense camera array versus a lens-lit approach. Yeah, totally. Dense camera array. The pros are you have very high quality images that are as tightly spaced as you can get your cameras, right? A traditional camera takes very high quality ray angle data, right? That's what a camera does. It's sampling especially a high resolution camera is sampling thin ray bundles across some area of view. The lens-lit approach really does something a little bit different. It's a series of lenslets that are roughly continuous, right? And they are mapping light rays. They're basically tiny cameras, but they're totally continuous with one another. Okay, so what you're giving up, let me back up a step. A 2D array of cameras, okay, gives you a series of point samples that are very high angular resolution, but you have discontinuous samples in the spatial regime. What this gives you is a series of very good angle samples, but you don't know if you're getting aliasing or not. If you have that sort of structure in the light that was seeing the reflection off the water onto the boat, then you're going to miss it with your dense array of cameras. But every individual sample you have is very high quality. With a lens-lit approach, like Raytrix or Litro's earlier cameras, you have a traditional lens in front and then this lens-lit behind it. What you're doing is you're spending the resolution on your sensor in both regimes. So now every individual pixel underneath there represents a ray bundle that struck the aperture at a certain spot. Okay, so you're now spending, theoretically, a similar amount of resolution across a larger space. Therefore, your angular samples are not as high quality. However, you don't have aliasing across the aperture of the taking lens anyway, because you have this densely packed lens-lit array. I don't know if that's a totally satisfying answer. In practice, no one's doing large-scale holographic imaging with lenslets because the optics don't work. They would just have to be totally massive. Lens-lit arrays tend to have a very narrow acceptance cone, so they wouldn't really work for very large-scale imaging, and they tend to work very well inside of cameras. I'm just going to move on. I don't know if that was satisfying or not. How will light field displays enable the eye to focus on different depths? Covered this a little earlier. Basically, if a light field near-eye light field display, in order for it to really be a light field display, it has to be able to draw rays across the user's eye at different angles. That's kind of the functional definition of a light field display. I mean, I guess you could hack your way into something else, but a sort of refocusing light field display has to be able to do that. How they do it is an open question. I mean, I think that's part of what Magic Leap has been dealing with, is that the ability to precisely draw light rays across a very small angle is really hard. I mean, this is like some photonics lab thing, and they're trying to put it into a headset. And I think that's why we haven't seen a lot of near-eye focus displays yet. You can hack it a bit if you know where the person's focusing, right? You only have to draw certain light rays, basically. You don't have to be able to address the entire four-dimensional raster of light rays across someone's eye. But that would be sort of a perceptual hack. It wouldn't be a full-on light field display. I hope that's satisfying. ask it again if not.
Just a time check. We have 2 minutes, just so you know.
Oh man, I did use up the time. That's great. Can you elaborate on some details about light field? Give some portion of your half-hour standalone talk on light field. The 30-second version. Okay, light fields are big, large arrays of light. If you think about light that moves through the space, it's all light moving in straight lines. If you want to actually capture a light field, carve out a surface. It moves in straight lines, so I know that this light ray is the same as this light ray. And so once you capture as many of those light rays as you can, and if you can reconstruct them, you basically are reconstructing everything you could see in that space, right? So that's the whole premise behind light fields. Describe the light as it is in space, not as it passes through a camera aperture, but across a large area. Yeah, hopefully that's the 30-second version of it. What would a combination polygon and RGB data look like, act like? I have no idea. I haven't seen those two combined, to be honest. I've seen light fields and polygons. I haven't seen RGBD plus polygons. Yeah, I just don't know. Is there any way to generate something like an alpha channel for light field layering and overlay? I'll call that a feature request. We'll put it into our tracker. No, yeah, there is. Anything you can do in a 2D image, you could in theory do in a light field, right? I mean, the source for these things is two-dimensional cameras. You could shoot a green screen, key it out. Now your individual input image data has an alpha channel, right? If your light field encoder is able to represent that alpha channel and carry it around, in theory, you've now got alpha. So that is a way where you could get to like the object sitting on your coffee table that has sort of a well-defined edge and transparency and everything. You have these rays that are effectively transparent, and you tell a display not to draw anything. So that would totally work. It is actually literally a feature request in our tracker. Okay.